Welcome to Good Game. I'm Hex.
I'm Bajo.
We've been a bit starved for a bit of RPG action lately, so this week we happily jumped into Risen 3 Titan Lords.
Also this week, the stylish 60s side-scrolling spy shooter, CounterSpy.
And our crime-solving skills are put to the test in the point-and-click Detective Grimoire.
Plus Goose signs, seals and delivers a postcard from a location that you may be very familiar with. But before all that, can you name the game for this week? What could it be? Okay, Hex, let's rewind time back to a fictional reality at the height of the Cold War. There's tension between the superpowers as they both compete with each other in a race to the moon.
Yes, but the twist is that instead of trying to land on the moon, they're in a race to try and be the first one to blow it up. Not exactly the best idea, but I guess these superpowers have more missiles than sense. And that's where you come in, a super spy trying to stop them in CounterSpy.
Seen that many Cold War games, have we, Hex? I guess coiled tension and intrigue aren't the simplest of gaming ingredients, and that makes CounterSpy a nice change of pace.
Yeah, it certainly feels unique. I think part of it is because the cel-shaded graphics have such a stylized look to them, especially the spy himself, who takes every opportunity to pose dramatically. I noticed the creative director had previously worked at Pixar on films like The Incredibles, which makes a lot of sense because the look of this game has a lot in common with that film, which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Any connection to The Incredibles is good in my books. I also appreciated all the visual touches. Like the way the propaganda posters really suit the era, and how the sides of the screen are curved like an old-fashioned TV.
The game itself is partly a 2D stealth 'em up. There are plenty of opportunities for silenced shots, security cameras to disable, sneaky choker holds, and some great-looking judo chops.
Yes, but the game abruptly switches from 2D to a third-person shooter, which surprised me at first. Whenever you take cover, the perspective spins around and gives you a crosshair to blast enemies with. I really like this idea, going from 2D to 3D. I feel like it's a natural evolution from games like Shadow Complex that did that 2.5D thing quite well. But I don't think they nailed it. I think the controls are just a bit too clunky.
I thought so too. I mean, not being able to move around at all while shooting just reminded me of those old Resident Evil and Metal Gear games that would nail your feet to the floor every time you pulled your gun out.
Show yourself!
But it's even more rigid here because you can only go into that aiming mode when you're standing next to cover.
Yeah, that's frustrating, but the worst is when you're being shot at from someone who's off in the background, because then you've got to go and find a bit of cover to get next to just so you can shoot back.
No, the worst is when an enemy you can't even see raises the alarm with his radio. And when you're in these multi-level rooms with loads of enemies, getting to the one that's on the radio to silence him can be pretty much impossible. It's so frustrating, especially when that alarm triggers a missile launch.
Yeah, I crazy raged at those alarms a few times, but I think we should give some context to the missile launches. Your main aim in each level is to infiltrate a top-secret missile facility and deactivate its launch capability. So you're kind of like a UN peacekeeper spy who's trying to defuse the conflict, and you do this by sneaking behind enemy lines on both sides of the war.
And both superpowers will start at DEFCON 5, which is Army talk for everything's cool. But when you make mistakes, like being spotted by cameras or being killed in action, or not stopping the guys raising that alarm I mentioned, then the DEFCON status will be raised, which is bad.
Yes, and if it gets to DEFCON 1, that means those fingers are poised right over the red buttons. Getting caught at DEFCON 1 triggers a 60-second countdown to the missile's launch, which normally means game over. But the handful of times I was able to shoot my way through and cancel that launch in time was pretty awesome.
The real problem for me was that the stealth was so inconsistent. The game rewards you for being stealthy with all sorts of score multipliers, and classic sneaky moves like pulling guards off ledges were pretty satisfying. But there were times I went into rooms where I was spotted before I even moved.
Yeah, this game has a lot of rough edges. For example, trying to throw a grenade back is way too fiddly. And why is the same button used for commando rolling as well as going into cover? It's madness! Even so, I quite enjoyed this game, and the moment I finished it, I wanted to go back through for a second playthrough to unlock all those guns.
Oh, the guns were great. I mean, when you've got something called the Treaty Violator, who's not going to want to unlock that?
And there's also the dart gun, which confuses enemies so they start attacking each other. Hiding behind cover while they do the work for you is always good fun. What are your overall thoughts, Hex?
Well, I loved the art style and the fact that the levels are randomly generated, but like I mentioned earlier, that flawed stealth just undermined it for me, so I'm giving it 6.
Yeah, it's a bit broken in places, but there is satisfying gameplay here. Plus, I felt like I was genuinely getting better with each retry, so I found that a bit compelling. I'm giving it 7.5.
And now here's Goose with the news.
Here's what's making news this week. Game streaming service Twitch Interactive has been purchased by Amazon for just shy of $1 billion US. It was reported earlier this year that Twitch had reached late-stage dealings with Google for acquisition at a similar price. However, it appears now that Google backed out of the deal to avoid potential unfair competition scrutiny, as acquiring Twitch would have effectively let them monopolize the video streaming market. In a letter to the press, Twitch CEO Emmett Shear revealed that the company chose Amazon because they believe in the Twitch community and share their values and long-term vision. Twitch's services are expected to remain unchanged in the near future.
Success!
Yay, you did it! Sucker Punch, the Sony-owned studio behind the successful Infamous and Sly Cooper games, has suffered layoffs. Sony has not announced how many staff were let go, but confirmed the reduction in workforce. The news broke alongside the completion of First Light, the standalone DLC for Infamous Second Son. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or ACCC, is suing digital games distributor Valve Corporation over its refund policy. Valve's treatment of refund cases in the past have been deemed misleading, unfair, and unlawful by the ACCC. If Valve cooperate in court, reforms would be made to their policy to ensure that it complies with Australian consumer rights.
Did you know that people with guilty consciences are more easily startled by loud noises? I'm sorry, I don't know why that went off. Anyway, just an interesting science fact.
Several high-profile gaming services were the targets of distributed denial of service, or DDoS attacks. Blizzard Entertainment's Battle.net, Microsoft's Xbox Live, and Sony PlayStation Network were all affected, with users suffering unstable connections and, in many cases, complete lockouts from the services. The group who claimed responsibility for these attacks also claims to be behind a bomb threat, which saw the diversion of an American Airlines flight which was carrying Sony Online Entertainment president John Smedley. The perpetrators have not yet been apprehended. And that's all the news for this week.
Thanks, Goose. London-based indie studio Super Flash Brothers Games have crowdfunded their latest mystery adventure game, Detective Grimoire. It was released earlier this year on mobile devices, and now it's been released on PC, so we thought we'd check it out.
This is the place it all began.
You don't remember.
A real expert, of course.
I have a good imagination.
We agreed the rest of the world would manage without it.
A murder has been committed at a tourist attraction based in an eerie swamp. Detective Grimoire is called to the scene to investigate the death of Richard Remington, owner of the attraction, Boggy's Bog.
Mr. Remington liked to keep us down to his skeleton staff.
A skeleton staff? Well, that's convenient for him since...
Don't make that joke. I won't laugh.
Yes, Boggy's Bog is the legendary site of a supposed bog monster, which is suspected to be responsible for the murder.
This is no Loch Ness Monster. You need to be taking this seriously.
The game's art style is reminiscent of something like Broken Age. However, the gameplay draws more influences from the likes of Professor Layton and Phoenix Wright. You set about this point-and-click mystery, searching for clues and interviewing suspects.
Why would a cameraman be working here?
I go where I'm needed. Vincent wanted to come to the swamp, and I was happy to help.
Thanks to some quirky writing and some great voice work from a variety of talented actors, all the characters are instantly likable.
Yeah, I thought so too. Grimoire himself has that kind of dashing yet goofy appeal.
Water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. Seriously, I'm not drinking that.
A hint of Maxwell Smart, even.
Grimoire. Strange. Is that your first name?
It's my second name. Detective is my first name.
All the dialogue is fun and well delivered, and the characters are so unique.
I usually find myself with 1 or 2 extra layers to wear. Most of this bulk is padding, I promise you.
I'm sure it is.
And since you spend so much of your time talking to people in these kinds of games, you really need those interactions to be well crafted and entertaining. So it was a great first impression.
You'll pick up clues by clicking your way around each location,
The open window looks over the wooden planks outside.
singling out areas and items of interest. But relevant pieces of information you pick up from conversations with suspects or sharing your clues and other character profiles will help provide you with the necessary information to piece together the mystery.
What do you notice?
They're loose and stretched.
That's right, someone else. Someone larger than me has worn these.
There's some fun humor in these conversations.
It's not my best lockpick. This new one's cheap. I used to own one, a superior model. Unfortunately, I misplaced.
And each character you meet is suspicious in some way, which creates red herrings all over the place.
Well, I was, unable to find my faithful cameraman last night.
That man was a threat to the swamp. We'll be better off without him.
In particular, I always enjoyed selecting the information and clues to form the truest statement relating to the case.
Vincent Van de Peer only recently got permission from Richard Remington to film here in the swamp.
Mostly because I liked entertaining the silly options.
Yeah, they were fun. Although you're also required to solve little puzzles from time to time, and I was pretty disappointed at how basic they were.
Perfect. I am amazing.
I mean, I understand perhaps wanting to make the game appropriate to all ages by keeping the challenges accessible, but honestly, a 4-year-old could do most of these.
That top hat guy would have so struggled with this one.
And since the plot of this is based around a murder, it can't really be pitched that young. But you were literally trying to fit basic shapes into cutouts like baby toys.
Yeah, or putting together the world's easiest jigsaw. It just seemed so off balance, didn't it? Which is a shame because I enjoyed working my way through the rest of the case solving.
Yes, and thankfully that is approached with a little more depth.
Swamp juice has been disappearing from my stock recently.
I like that they've made it particularly important to pay careful attention to the information each suspect offers up, even if it may not seem to be relevant. They give good insight into themselves, but it's when you ask about other characters that you get those key revelations that really drives the investigation forwards.
Yeah, and you're not just left entirely to trial and error, which is good. There are generally little hints that guide you towards which clues you should share with which suspects to get more information. You just have to be savvy about it. Though I will say I got half to 2/3 of my way through the investigation when I figured out who the murderer was.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? But there's still mystery in the how and why, so you soldier on. But then I found myself at about 80% completion and I was unsure of who had those last pieces of information I needed. So then I started going through the swamp suspects one by one and showing everyone everything I had.
I'm afraid I have no idea.
You won't be getting very far discussing.
What is it? Some evidence?
Is that one of your clues?
The real swamp creature had...
Until I found every last piece of evidence. Which was frustrating because I already knew who the killer was.
Yeah, you kind of just want to yell Cluedo, Professor Plum, Candlestick, Library, and be done with it.
But as you present your final case, you get to go through every piece of evidence and how it was relevant. Which is a nice way of taking you back through all of the work that you've done, and how each person plays a part in the story.
What are you going to give it?
Well, I think this was a fun and well-made game. But even though it was intended to be light-hearted and entertaining, I just found those kindergarten puzzles really dragged it down for me, so I'm giving it 6.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, those performances were good enough for me to want to see this mystery through to the end. And I did have fun with this, but it's just crying out for more challenge, so I'm giving it 6.5.
Is this a real shipwreck? How did it get here?
I can't expose all the secrets of the swamp. I don't want to spoil your fun.
Is there a secret to this shipwreck?
No.
You just spoiled my fun.
Oh, thank you, yes, postcards. I guess a great thing about video games is their ability to transport us from our boring and dull surrounds, like, say, this office, and they can transport us all the way to... oh, video game offices. That's easy. Synonymous with boredom and monotony in real life, the unassuming workplace feels like the last place that we'd want to return to while enjoying the escapism of games. Yet for some reason, the plain old place of work regularly shows up for us to stealth, shoot, or skid around in. Such a drab environment may seem like an uninspired choice when designing a level, but on closer inspection, the office is well suited for many game types. First and foremost, the floor plan. An open area littered with maze-like pods, cubicles, and wall dividers makes for great cover both defensively and offensively. Interconnecting rooms, glass walls, and 90-degree grid layouts lead to intense cat-and-mouse standoffs, with the occasional office lackey getting to play hostage. These repetitive hallways and undistinguishably identical layouts can have a rather disorientating effect. Ugh. and some games utilise this more than others, taking advantage of the tedious routine that kicks in when we're left to kill time in these humdrum hangouts. But it's when we stop to actually admire the fine level of destructive detail scattered about these prisons of productivity that we see an opportunity to live out our ultimate daydreams, jumping on, blowing up, and even crashing through these white-collar workplaces with far less consequence than having to speak to your supervisor. That's not to say it has to all be action and excitement in the office. Like a lot of everyday routine locations, it's after everyone's left and the lights have gone out that they become extremely unsettling environments.
Really cool. Everything is totally cool.
And you realise you probably should have punched out a little earlier. So next time you find yourself buried under a pile of paperwork or a dreaded deadline, just remember when it's all over, you get to go home, put your feet up, grab a controller and come straight back again. Oh, come on!
Thanks, Goose. Risen 3 Titan Lords is an RPG from Piranha Bytes, the makers of the Gothic series.
How many times during my countless raids did death stare me right in the face? But that hideous face staring back at me was beyond even my imagination.
You play the son of the famous pirate Steelbeard. And while searching for treasure, you discover a spooky skull cave with your sister, Pirate Patty.
I don't like this.
After a brief encounter with Skeletor, you learn that these skull caves are popping up all over the place.
What can you tell me about the Skull Cave?
And within them lie portals to the underworld, which is where you go when you die. The underworld is reaching out to the living, especially to you, because you quickly find yourself without a soul.
You no longer have a spirit, and you turn more and more into a minion of the underworld.
While the opening sequence is quite messy, it's a great introduction to the game and also a good setup for your character's adventure. Plus, having no soul allows a morality system to be put into place.
Everything you do from this moment on will have consequences.
I like that instantly you have clear goals. You want to find your sister who thinks you're dead, and the mystery of these dark portals is intriguing.
Yes, especially as they appear to be bringing a menace across the whole land that affects everyone you meet.
The shadows storm through here like a pack of wild boars, and then, suddenly, they scarpered. There's hardly any sugar cane left.
Does that mean there won't be any rum?
Spot on, mate.
The voice acting is a mixed bag, but it was still a little better than I was expecting.
I've seen something like them before, but that was a dream.
No, this is no dream.
Yeah, I agree. I think this game is full of interesting characters, actually, that all have a reason for being where they are and their own story to tell.
The vermin from the Inquisition just took my lighthouse. Even the pirates had more honor in their bones.
Yeah, it's an impressively fleshed out world, considering the low budget feel to the game. Especially the companions you meet along the way, who also have their own stories and quests. The more you talk to people, the more quests you pick up.
Keep your weapons at the ready and follow me.
And just about everyone you meet is in need of your help in some way or another.
Yeah, I did find a lot of the quests were about retrieving other people's gear and bags, though. I mean, God, stop losing your bags, everyone.
I don't need anything. Thanks. Well, except maybe my bag.
I found your bag.
It is a very deep RPG, though.
Yeah, surprisingly so. It reminded me a lot of The Witcher and Dragon Age at times. Especially as you prepare for fights and wander about with companions who chat away to you and partake in your conversations with other NPCs.
The shadow creatures use these portals to get across to the other side. They receive their orders from the lords of the underworld through the portals.
There are a handful of islands you can travel to, and nothing stops you from roaming them completely, which is good.
I'm going to make a hat out of your skin!
The islands have a claustrophobic feel to them, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, there are wide but set paths for you to go down. The world can be a little bit fiddly to navigate, especially as you take horrendous fall damage.
Yes, I can't remember a game that made falling this scary. But as much as we like the story and the characters in Risen 3, it has a lot of flaws, most notably in the combat. the fighting just isn't much fun, is it?
Yeah, and this is one of those games that tries to make the combat feel different and strategic, which is a great goal to have. But they just haven't achieved that, and it ends up being clumsy and painful for the player.
When you're in a fight, you're always in one of two states, either offensive or defensive. When you're offensive, you need to carefully chain together attacks. If you just button mash, then you'll fail and die. And when you're on the defensive, you need to avoid damage and block attacks as much as possible until the opportunity presents itself to attack.
Your guard can be broken and things can glitch out a bit and hurt you, especially as you try to swap targets. Some enemies also leap and charge, and it's not quite clear how to avoid them strategically, so those fights can feel cheap.
Yeah, I think there may be some who find these fights quite strategic and interesting, but I just think they're hard for all the wrong reasons. The worst part is none of this is explained well in the haphazard opening sequence. The tutorial is just too rushed for such an unusual fighting system. So you're going to struggle unless you played the last game or go online to find tips on how to fight, and that's just not good enough.
On top of that, your companions are totally rubbish at fighting.
Bloody shadows!
Sometimes they help, but sometimes they just hang in the back like they don't know the fight is even happening.
Come here, foul creature!
Hey, hello, some evil dogs are killing me. Some help would be nice.
Yeah, the AI is pretty atrocious, and you really need their help too, because you rely on your companions to break the enemy's offensive attack so you can then go on the offensive.
On top of random ice skating and enemies awkwardly moving about the environment, it's just a mess, isn't it?
Yeah, it all feels really dated, and it's such a shame because I love everything about this game except for every time I have to pull out my sword.
Can you teach me something?
What would you like to know?
There are some tricks you can learn along the way to make the fightings easier, such as riposte, and training with NPCs you find about the place give pretty big bonuses. But much like the last game, it's super expensive to train, which makes it hard to get ahead. For example, it costs 500 gold to learn how to do this.
Teach me how to sneak.
All right. Now, what are you up to, I wonder?
Ah yes, the fine art of tiptoe movement. But yes, the fact that my character was always so poor frustrated me again with this one, Bajo. Well, on the one hand, it did drive me to want to go out and quest, but on the other hand, I didn't want to do that because it involves getting into those frustrating fights.
Yeah, the many problems of this game actually upset me because there are so many great systems at work too. There's the morality system we mentioned that ties into the story, a day-night cycle which ties into sneaking and theft, there's quest hints and dialogue exploration, you can intimidate people, there's lockpicking, and all that stuff works pretty well. I love the flexibility within each quest as well. Often you have more than one way to finish it through action or dialogue.
This is gonna be a laugh. Get over here. Rip his head off!
Most of all, I like how reactive NPCs are to your actions.
Yes, you learn very quickly never to pull your sword out in a pirate's house.
What are you doing with that weapon? Solid burls now! You've got no business here.
The NPCs do feel quite alive, don't they? Just those little lines of dialogue here and there.
Finally, I get to use my weapon!
And the level of swearing feels authentic to this world, and it's usually pretty hilarious.
Ah, that looks f***ing painful. What sort of creatures are they? And just look at the cave.
I don't f***ing know.
The f*** off.
But what annoyed me most though was that in order to loot a corpse you need to put your weapon away, and then to loot it's the same button that you use to talk to your companion. So you're always accidentally talking to them instead of when you're just trying to pick up an apple or something.
What do you think about
the pirates? No.
Yeah, I was raging hardcore at that.
You know, I really wanted to finish this game, Bajo, because there's some really great stories and mechanics at play here, but it's just so hard to enjoy an RPG when half the gameplay isn't fun.
I know, the only thing that really pulled me along was that I'm a bit starved for an RPG at the moment. And with this, I did enjoy those little stories and finding more companions, getting new hats, and wanting badly to learn all the skills and the mystery behind everything that's going on. We reviewed this on PC, and I think it's quite beautiful at times as well.
Especially when you're on the beaches, looking out at the ocean. And the gear looks lovely too, with a nice attention to detail that'll make you stop and stare now and then.
Maybe later.
But all in all, I can't recommend this at all. I just think it's too rough for the third game in a series, so I'm giving it 5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Yeah, it's a real shame, and a bit of a missed opportunity to get this series on track, so I'm gonna give it 5 as well.
Goodbye.
Before we wrap up, Hex, let's talk about the Silent Hills demo that recently popped up on the PS4 store, the ambiguously titled PT.
Yes, the internet is on fire with chatter and theories about this crazy corridor horror romp. And with Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro teaming up for both Silent Hills and this little teaser, well, we had to jump in and see just how scary it actually was.
The family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon. Don't touch that dial now. The son came to a cascading commotion. The father shot him too. His 6-year-old daughter has a good chance to hide in the bathroom, but reports suggest lures her out by telling her it was just a game.
Hex, I didn't know what to make of PT at first. I didn't find it particularly scary, but I did find it tense. From the moment you wake up and crawl to your feet, you're alone. You're not given any direction and quickly find yourself caught in this endless loop, walking through the same corridor over and over.
The father shot him too.
Yeah, I thought it was labouring that repetitive mechanic a bit. But what that does is place you in a situation where you start to question your own actions. You start to think, am I doing this right? Is the game broken? Did I miss something?
Yes, with each loop you actually start to feel less sane. Initially, I found this frustrating. Sure, it's a high-textured, nicely lit and well-rendered corridor, but it's still just one corridor. However, you soon start to notice that there are minute differences in each loop.
I see what you're doing.
And then the hunt for clues is on.
I thought it was interesting that I found myself going through the same self-imposed actions over and over. Look at that, 1 minute to midnight. Checking the time, looking at the same objects. The game doesn't ask you to do this, but you find yourself doing it naturally. Which is why when subtle changes start to occur, it's so thrilling.
Yeah, you definitely latch on to those small differences. Searching for some obscure trigger to break free of the cycle, or at the very least, move to the next corridor instance.
It's so dark.
All the while, this tension is building, and you know that the further you progress, the closer you are to some terrifying encounter. They nailed the atmosphere, didn't they?
Oh man, I don't think I've heard more horrifying sounds in my life. I'm not even sure what I was listening to as I looked through that peephole. Crying, sloshing, tearing, groaning and thumping. Gross. It just sends your imagination into overdrive, which in my opinion is one of the greatest horror techniques. You know, showing you less and letting you imagine the worst.
Yeah, and that's amplified by how hard you have to concentrate to solve these puzzles. It reminded me a lot of those old flash jump scare games, where you'd be using your mouse cursor to navigate a maze, your nose all but pressed against the monitor as you move your way through a narrow labyrinth, when suddenly, bam!
Yeah, those things are the worst. There is obviously a much more refined atmosphere in PT.
Yeah, there is, but for me the creepiness kind of melted away once I started focusing on the puzzles. Still, it's intriguing trying to piece together all the fragments of this narrative, and I like that everyone's playthrough is slightly different in some ways.
Yeah, I still didn't make sense of it at all.
The only me is me. Are you sure the only you is you?
But I don't think you're really meant to. There are countless theories online. The last time I saw this much of a blaze of discussion over a game's narrative was BioShock Infinite.
Yeah, there's some serious sleuth work going on, such as how PT may actually be shorthand for a tree called Populus Tikokaka or something like that.
Yeah, something to do with the model, the gene model matching the numbers that voice comes out with at some point, I think.
204863.
And this particular tree is common in Northwest America, the setting of the previous Silent Hill games.
Plus there's also trees on the demo's promo art. It's all coming together, Hex.
Wait a minute, is this just going to be a video game version of The Happening? You know that M. Night Shyamalan movie where the trees are trying to kill you?
No, I don't know it, but it sounds boring.
Yeah,
Killer trees.
It's pretty lame. Anyway, as far as teasers go, this definitely preps us for what we can only assume is going to be a pretty terrifying game. I know this isn't meant to be representative of Silent Hill's gameplay, but it really is a promising taste of the atmosphere that Kojima and Del Toro are going to bring to the series. I'm excited and petrified, but mostly excited.
It's interesting to see developers experimenting with prologues and unique demos. The Stanley Parable had a fantastic demo, and even Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes, which was, not very creative and very overpriced, it still got people talking about the game. So I hope that trend continues.
Yeah, me too. Good chat. But now, did you name the game for this week?
It was Lucidity from 2009. In this platform puzzler, you took on the role of Sophie, who was searching her dreamscape for Nana. Rather than controlling Sophie, you controlled slingshots, staircases, and trampolines to help her travel from one screen to the next. And it's named the game for this week because its creative director, David Nottingham, was the creative lead behind CounterSpy.
Next week, The Walking Dead Season 2 comes to a conclusion in what we hope is a happy ending.
Look, by the door! It's peeking out! I think it's...
We also check out the standalone DLC for Infamous First Light.
They knew about the penthouse thing. Don't know about our boat. We gotta go now.
Over on Spawn Point on ABC3 this weekend, we'll be running a big birthday card competition to celebrate our upcoming 200th episode. We'll also be checking out the Michael Bay-inspired Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game.
Excellent. Seek help from your brother.
Until next time, may all your games be good ones. Hex out.
Bajo out. Hex, I've decided I'm not going to see the Michael Bay Ninja Turtles movie.
Really?
I'm not going to. It's got to stop.
But you've been so excited about the
Gotta stop
Turtles
somewhere.
movie coming out.
It's been a tough decision.